Big showdown in Colorado tonight as the Wild take on the Avalanche. We'll preview the game. Plus, we'll talk about who may be the playoff starter in net for the Wild, all today on Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Just a reminder, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode the moment it drops. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at tonight's game against the Colorado Avalanche with Jayden Homuth. We'll talk about the Fleury Gustafsson tandem and which one may end up drawing the start come postseason time. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. And as mentioned, we're going to start with the showdown tonight in Colorado against the Colorado Avalanche. Here to help us break it down is Jayden Homuth. Jayden, one of the biggest games of the year, maybe the biggest game of the year, and an opportunity for the Wild to go toe-to-toe against that team like that it seems is always there at the end of the day. The Colorado Avalanche, the reigning Stanley Cup champions. It's a good opportunity to go into Colorado tonight and just kick them in the teeth.
Yeah, the Colorado Avalanche are like the big brother who's always just shadowing over you. Like anytime you think you do something good, you just look in your rearview mirror and they're just sitting right there. We haven't beat them yet this year. Hopefully tonight we can get that done. Early in October, we lost 6-3, I think it was, and then we just recently lost last month, I believe, February 15th. We lost the home game to them 3-2. Fleury was not the greatest in that game, but I'm assuming Fleury goes tonight. Goalies are not out yet, but I think that Fleury did enough on Monday to earn another big-time start. Mikko Rantanen is going to have to be stopped. I think that he's more of a threat right now than McKinnon has been recently. And if none of the listeners know, Mikko Rantanen is having the quietest 50-goal season in NHL history. He's sitting at 48 right now, and he will surpass 50 within the next coming days. And looking at the matchup, Avs got special teams advantage on the power play. Almost tied with the penalty kill. We're at 13th and they're at 15th. Surprisingly, we have a better face-off percentage than them as a team. I know that we've been really happy about the Wild winning games in the face-off matchup category, but I guess it's been a trend for the whole season. Goaltending-wise, I think that the Wild have the edge, but core-wise, you just look at the Avalanche, who made the Stanley Cup playoffs look easy last year. It's hard to look past them and be like, it's an easy game. You just can't. It's their talent is just another level.
Yeah, it's interesting because you look at last year, Avalanche had the season that they had, the amazing season, won the Stanley Cup. The Wilds had the season that they had, and so you look at that matchup last year and you're like, well, gee, Wild have an offense that can probably keep pretty even with the Avs, and beyond that, probably not a whole lot of areas in which the Wild were better. Different story this year, because obviously you would say the Avs have the better offense, but like you alluded to, Wild's better defensively, probably better goaltending, because beyond Anton Georgiev, it is a literal who's who of goalies for the Avalanche. They've had like 5 different players that have started when Georgiev doesn't play. He's very good, as the Wild saw earlier in the season. But compared to the numbers that Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury are putting up this year, I think it's pretty clear that the edge goes to those two. And that would be something interesting as the season goes on. In the playoffs, if something were to happen to Georgiev, where do you turn?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I like to look at last year when the Wild got to Ville Husso in game 3, I think, and the Blues were able to turn to a seasoned vet who's won a Stanley Cup before, Jordan Binnington, who was able to kind of lock in and clinch that series for them. The Colorado Avalanche do not have that. They have a set starter who leads the team in wins with 34, and behind him is Johansson, or Francois, I think, with 7, and Francois has 2, and Kincaid has 1, and Aunen has 1. And I think that the Wild definitely, if we do meet up with Colorado in the postseason and you get to Georgiev like they got to Husso last year, the Avalanche don't have a guy to turn to if they don't have Georgiev.
Yeah, it creates some potential interesting decisions that would have to be made if that ever happens. But big key there is you'd have to do something to force the hands of the Avalanche. But at least in this game, a lot of high flying superstar players that'll be going toe to toe. Unfortunately, no Kirill Kaprizov, but Matt Boldy has made his case to be the guy, at least right now, that can carry this team. We'll talk more about Boldie here in a little bit, but Boldie has, in the last month, done every bit as much as any of the top guys in the NHL have done. And so if you're looking for, in this matchup, a leader to go toe-to-toe against the likes of Nathan MacKinnon, you've got one in Matt Boldy.
Yeah, I was just looking at the game sheet for the game tonight, and Matt Boldy, what he's doing is almost unheard of, not only for the Wild, but around the league. I'm looking at players to watch the last 5 games. Nathan MacKinnon has 2 goals and 7 points, and that's great production. But then you look at Matt Boldy, who has 9 goals in the last 5 games, who's just absolutely tearing it up. And it just seems to come easy to him. And he said it last night, though. He's a very humble player. You could tell by his interviews. He wants the credit to go to his line mates, and you can't put it past Boldie. You see the setups that Eriksson Ek and Johansson have been giving him, and it's crazy. They're putting it right on his tape, and he's able to put the puck wherever he wants. And the goals that he scored last night were unstoppable. Like they weren't easy. They weren't lucky Plinko bounces that you see some players get to break a streak. They're just he picks a spot and he scores, and it's done.
Yeah, he's getting closer to the net, but he's also, like you said, he's picking those spots, and he's lasering shots past some pretty good goalies and putting them in spots where there just is no chance. So if he's able to continue that with those line mates, you've got a line that can go toe-to-toe against that top line nightmare that the Avalanche have been able to employ all season. And then beyond that, you're fighting amongst the bottom 3 lines to just try to kind of cancel each other out. But you got to get that top production, and the Wild have been able to do that here throughout the entire month of March. So should be a great game between these two teams. It's a 9:20 start, 9:22 start, which is that's what we like. We love that.
Not when you got to be up so early.
No,
but I do want to counter, though. I did want to counter because I think that last game, that first line had a way better game than what we've been seeing from them. That Zuccarello was able to skate around more. He didn't look like he was coasting as a passenger anymore. Hartman had a great shot with a great goal. Just kind of walked in 1-on-2 and did did last year Hartman stuff. And Foligno's throwing the body around, and he seemed to have a temper tantrum the last couple of games, but whether that's lack of production, you never know with players like that. But Foligno's always been one to get into that mixed style of play. But I think that I think they're holding their own now. And what we saw last Thursday in Philly will probably the worst game we've ever seen from that combination. I don't think they can get any worse than that. And they've bounced back very well. And I like the direction that they're going. Obviously, when Kaprizov gets back, they're going to be split back up, and Kaprizov's going to get his normal spot. But for tonight, I think that line is able to be trusted now against a top line.
Yeah, I agree fully. And the feed from Zuccarello to Hartman was great. The shot by Hartman was great. He's playing with kind of that chip on the shoulder again. He's right on that perfect level. This is the Ryan Hartman that we want on a nightly basis throughout the season. He's not kind of tipping over to the other side of it where he's being called for a ton of penalties. He's shooting the puck, he's making plays, he's scoring goals. Right on that edge, just enough of that competitive fire to keep him going in the right way. So, yeah, it is a team that has two lines that are performing well, and obviously 9 goals in 5 games for Matt Boldy is just it's insane. So, it's going to be a fun one tonight. Regardless of who ends up getting the start in net, there is an interesting conversation to be had about how that plays out. And so we will dive in to the goalie situation. Who would start if you had to pick one today? Who starts game 1? We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after a word from our sponsor, which tonight is the official sports betting partner of Locked On. That is FanDuel Sportsbook. The NCAA tournament is heading down to the final wire, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just head to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to get your no-sweat first bet. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team will be cutting down the nets. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure you check out the Locked On Avs podcast to get some further intel into the Colorado Avalanche as we gear up for tonight's game. You can find them on YouTube and free on your favorite podcast platforms. Seth Topal joined by Jayden Homuth. All right, let's dive in. Fleury or Gustafsson? Let me read you the numbers first. For the month of March, Marc-Andre Fleury in 7 starts, 6-0-1, a 2.56 goals against average, a .928 save percentage. Philip Gustafsson, 3-1-2, a 1.77 goals against average, and a .941 save percentage. Jayden, you have to pick one. Who do you go with?
I'm getting deja vu from last year, man. I don't know. The 3 Stanley Cups wants me to say Marc-Andre Fleury, but the calm stature, collectiveness of Philip Gustafsson wants me to pick him. And I think that this team does not care who is in net right now. But if I had to pick one, I would. I think the safe option is Gustafsson. But I don't know. Fleury has games like he had Monday night where he just was the reason the Wild were able to stay in the game. That first period was terrible leading up to that Middleton goal. And Fleury just kept the Wild in the game for them to get their feet wet. And we've seen Gustafsson do that too. So it's really a coin flip just like last year. So I don't know. I'd say Gustafsson, but I also want to just do a 360 and say Marc-Andre Fleury. So I'm just going to ask you the question and say, who would you want game one?
It's funny because you look at it, and Cam Talbot last year had that stretch leading up to the postseason where he was, I think,
15 straight with a point.
Yeah, 13-0-2 in those 15 games. So you have that hot stretch, and then you have Marc-Andre Fleury, who you bring in with that postseason pedigree. Those are the factors you have last year. Here's the differences. Filip Gustavsson this year has had a stretch like that for 5 months. It hasn't been a 15-game stretch in a season in which there were some performances where you're like, yikes. Filip Gustavsson had the early clunker to start the season, and ever since then, he has been practically lights out. He's been invincible almost at times throughout the season. And Marc-Andre Fleury has had some more waves at points this season where he's been really, really, really good. He's also had some stretches where you look and you're like, should have probably had 3 or 4 saves out of those 5 goals. And I think for what this team needs or how this team operates, and I'm going to set this up, and I hope this doesn't sound negative. Here's how I would do it. I would give Filip Gustavsson the first opportunity to fail in the series. I think you start with Gustavsson, but if there is a need, if you get routed in one, Fleury is right there and ready. That's how I would do it. And again, I don't mean that to sound like a negative. I think you just have Fleury ready as an option if Gustavsson gets lit up in one of the first few games, to where you can just go right to Fleury. That's how I do it. But honestly, we've got 8 games left. And depending on how those 8 games play out, depending on what we see for starts, they've been pretty even so far this year. Fleury has the slight edge, but they've been pretty even. I think you got to just roll with the guy who's done it pretty much all season. Fleury would be a very capable emergency guy or a 1B if you need to go that route during a series.
Yeah, I think that we have the same problem we had last year, which is a great problem to have when you have 2 number one goalies. And I think you said it right. You give Gustavsson, you don't look at it as who gets the start. You look at who gets the first chance of failure. And I think that you could ride Gustavsson, and if he has no failure for a whole series, you win that series, you move on. Same thing. He has no failure, you win that series, you move on. But you get to game 3 and he lets in 4 or 5, you can turn to a ready Marc-Andre Fleury, hopefully next game. Last year, you think maybe you should have went to Talbot before game 6 and not thrown him into an elimination game after not playing for 2 weeks. But the past is the past. We're not going to dwell on it. But I think that you go Gustavsson as of right now. If tomorrow was game 1 and you needed to pick someone to lead the team out, I'd say Gustavsson.
And here's the other part of this into how this can be phrased as well. And I know there have been criticisms of how Dean Evason has handled some of his younger players throughout the season. Those are valid.
Mm-hmm.
You can point to this as being an opportunity that Filip Gustavsson earned with his play this year to be able to start a game 1 of a postseason series He's a young goalie, but he has absolutely done everything that's been asked of him this year. He's been one of the best goalies in the league all season. So that's where it differs from last year, because you got a veteran guy in Cam Talbot who obviously didn't handle how that played out well, but he was a veteran guy. And so he felt like he probably had earned that opportunity through that final stretch of the season. This is an opportunity that the Wild can use to reward Gustafsson and say, hey, you've been fantastic all season. Go get him.
Yeah. And that's what I think it'll be. I think that he's definitely earned it throughout the season. He came here. I actually saw him in person last year. Kaprizov, the first goal that Kaprizov had last year was on Philip Gustafsson in overtime against the Ottawa Senators. And I was watching that game, and I never thought that would be our leader the following year. But he was a young goalie who, from the first time I saw him to what I'm seeing now, has grown like crazy. Like the step that he took this year was insane, or it was wild. But I think that he earned it, and Marc-Andre Fleury isn't the type of veteran. I'm not gonna put any down words on Cam Talbot's name, but I think Fleury can sit the bench game one with a cooler mind and not be as upset. And he's someone who wants to see his younger guys succeed, and I think that he will just be ready for his next game instead of kind of being upset and angry about it like Talbot did last year.
Yeah, for sure. And the other caveat of this too, it doesn't matter who starts if the team plays like they did collectively against the St. Louis Blues. So that, first and foremost, is the thing that will need to be ironed out, is how the team plays in front of them. But yeah, if we had to make the decision for tomorrow, we're riding the Gus bus.
And I also like to think that Marc-Andre Fleury, if say the Wild win the Stanley Cup, say Fleury doesn't play a single game and he's on the bench the whole time, I think he's going to enjoy sizing his fourth ring. I don't think he has any complaints.
100%. Yeah, he's at the point. He's at the point where he has enough of those personal accolades that if it is something that benefits the team, all for it. If it benefits the team having Gustafsson start, he's going to be all for it. So we'll see how it plays out again, because we're not the coaches, and so there's still also some time to see how things play out here over the final 8 games. Maybe something happens that changes the perception of the situation. Time will tell. Time also will tell how Matt Boldy finishes up his absolutely otherworldly March heater. And so we'll talk a little bit about that to finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure you check out the Locked On NHL podcast to get the full lowdown on everything going on throughout the National Hockey League. Seth Topol joined by Jayden Homuth. Jayden, let's get your perspective on the Matt Boldy heater. Heater does not feel like a strong enough word, so I'm going to call it an eliter. We used that term in the past. I think I used that for one of Kevin Fiala's stretches last year. This one just feels like a little bit of kind of Matt Boldy taking that next step, doesn't it?
Yeah, the team needed someone to step up, and at first it was Ryan Reeves, but now we are glad to say that Boldy is here, and he's playing like he's worth $50 million or $49 million. And I'm looking at the beloved Michael Russo's most recent article where he explained how hot Matt Boldy is right now. And it's a list of all these stats from Boldy, and just not even this season, just the last 10 games. And Boldie is chasing Marian Gaborik in franchise records for youngest players of 21 years of age and career hat tricks, career goals. He is the first player since Eric Stahl to score 11 goals in 9 games. He became the 4th U.S.-born player to record 3 hat tricks before the age of 22. Boldie also joined Kaprizov as the 2nd player this season to notch a natural hat trick. Also, 9 games ago, Matt Boldy was on a pace for 21 goals for the entire season. I actually texted you about this, Seth. I thought that it was crazy. On March 8th, he was at a pace of 21 goals, and he was struggling, didn't score all of February, and now he's 7 goals past that pace just 3 weeks later. And what he's been doing is absolutely crazy, and it's what superstars do. And I'm not going to say Boldie is a superstar. He's a star. He's not an established superstar yet. Some Wild fans might get mad at me, but I'm not. He's 21 years old. He's about to be 22. But he will be a superstar, and the numbers that he's putting up right now is only done by superstars, and this is his first step into that next level of his career. And he's still on his entry level deal right now. So you get the kid a line mate, and it's crazy what happens.
Yeah, and I think it's important to differentiate too, is that, you know, other players are not immune from having a stretch where they maybe score a goal in 3 straight games, a goal in 4 straight games. You know, maybe you go on like a 10-game point streak. Things like Matt Zuccarello has done throughout his Wild tenure over the last couple of years. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But going on a stretch in which you managed to score 11 goals in 9 games, and to take that a step further, as we talked about at the start of the show, 9 goals in 5 games, that's where it becomes a good player on a heater to a guy who is just taking over. And that's where Matt Boldy's at right now, is a guy that is just, he's taking over for this team in the month of March.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable. Like last night, I stepped away from the TV for about a minute, and I heard the goal horn go off, and I was, hey, we got another one. Peek into my room just to see Matt Boldy again. I'm like, oh, another goal. I leave again. Hear the goal horn go off again. I peek my head back in the room. It's Boldy again. You just know he's going to get another hat trick. He's going to get another hat trick. Sure enough, I sit down, get comfortable for the 3rd period, open my laptop. Before I know it, Boldy has a hat trick. It seems that he's one of the very, very, very few players in the league right now that can just score whenever he wants to.
And the shift has been amazing. Is you see his teammates saying, all right, this guy is on another planet right now. And so, and I think that was a little bit of what was needed to kind of get him over the hump, is, look, when you're that guy out there, you got to be the one letting it rip. Those guys that are on the line with you are great at setting teammates up. And you look at the makeup of this team now, once Kirill Kaprizov comes back, Kirill's obviously the number 1 guy, but boy, oh boy, Matt Boldy in March, that's a heck of a number 2.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at, you mentioned point streaks, and I wanted to look at the most recent, or the most longest one recently, and it's Patrick Kane with 26 games back in 2015. And I remember hearing about that. But I was trying to find the numbers, but my Wi-Fi is struggling. But I think I saw him earlier. The points that Patrick Kane had in those games, most of them were actually assists to keep the streak alive. Excuse me. Matt Boldy, I think, is halfway to his point total in the 26-game point streak in just 11 games. Just to put it into perspective. And if Boldy was, I'm not saying he's a selfish player, but if he was also a pass-first guy and still scoring at this, he would be easily having 6-point nights, 3 goals, 3 assists, 3 goals, 2 assists. And it would, and I'm not saying he can't do that, because tonight he could come out of the woodworks and drop 5 points on us. And you can't say he can't, because what he's been doing recently. But I'm really excited to see, because he's still progressing. This isn't his mountain peak. And he's got buddies in Iowa that are going to be coming up, and you got Rossi and Boldy, and the future's really good for Minnesota, and I'm excited. I think all Minnesota Wild fans should be excited.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a good point too, in that he's not a selfish guy, but I think that's what this team needs more of, is those guys that are going to shoot when they get the puck. We talk about that a lot with the power play.
Matt Zuccarello.
Yeah. When it's
sorry.
No, that's fine.
Gotta shoot. He has to shoot.
Because that was a guy that I was going to bring up. That is one of the more reoccurring problems for this team on the power play when it's not working, is that guys are passing too much. And you talk about that top line. Sometimes they get a little too pass heavy. More players on this team that are just, when they get the puck, are going to shoot it. And if that's the thing that Matt Boldy carries from this stretch going forward, that's where the big difference comes in. It's great for him to still be a playmaker, because obviously teams are going to throw more attention at him. But if he becomes a shoot first guy from this March stretch without Kaprizov going forward, that's where the big difference has been put in.
Yeah, this team, I tweeted out last night that just with Boldy right now, this team looks almost unbeatable. And you add Kaprizov and Nyquist and Klingberg back into the mix, and you don't know what the limits are for this team, especially with a good goaltending tandem. I don't want to say parade on 7th, but I don't. It's like every year we got these expectations for this team, and you kind of have, there's some doubts there. Like last year, it was, damn, I brought up last year a lot this episode, but last year the special teams was very, very bad. But this year you got a top 10 penalty kill and a power play who is struggling right now. But like I've said in recent episodes, you just got to wait for Kaprizov to get back, because that'll solve itself.
Yeah, and it's a team that you look at that, and you look at some of the things that happened down the stretch with injuries. You had a couple of key players that were hurt going into that St. Louis series. And knock on wood, 8 games left. The Wilds acquired enough depth at the deadline to be able to handle that. And the special teams have improved substantially. So it looks like a team that is pretty intent on not having another first-round exit this season. But we've said that in the past, and we really only are going to be able to exercise that demon once a playoff series is actually won.
Yes. And I wanted to get into something quick before we end here. I wanted to look back at Billy Garen's trades from this year, just this year. I don't want to go back. I wanted to ask you what your favorite one, or top 3, or best 2, wherever you want to go there. Which ones do you think were the best for the team, or the most beneficial at this point? Not from when they happened, because I think a trade like Ryan Reeves for a 5th round pick maybe didn't seem that good, but looking at it now, I think that was an absolute steal.
Yeah, I think if you're going to rank the ones that have impacted this season the most, I think you go Philip Gustafsson first, because, I mean, guy's one of the top 5 statistical goalies in the NHL. So,
and not only that, you swapped him for a guy who's been injured all year.
Yep. So that's top. That's top pretty easy. Marcus Johansson, I think, is number 2. And I'd put Ryan Reeves number 3. I think those moves have all had major impacts on this season.
Exactly what I wrote down.
Great minds think alike. I think those moves have had a tremendous impact on this season. And that is all due in part to the guy pulling the strings, GM Billy Garen.
Billy Garen.
In BG we trust.
In BG we trust. Never, sometimes, like, I don't even know why I second guess him anymore. Like, I was sitting there during trade deadline day, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And now I'm like, thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. And I don't know why I second guess him anymore. I'm just going to trust him every time now. He makes the calls, and he hasn't failed.
Yeah, he's pulled a lot of really good strings, and I think we forget a lot of the time that he's carrying around a briefcase full of $12 million that he can't open.
Yeah. I'm interested to see what he does with that in 2 years.
Just you wait. So yeah, you've got a team that's in first place, waiting for their superstar to return, waiting for another impact move at the deadline to be ready to play, and they're battling for first place against the Avalanche later today. So it's about all you can ask for. So we'll see how things play out, but I think that'll do it for today's episode. So now that your first listen of the day is done, again, make sure you check out either Locked On Avalanche or Locked On NHL to get more intel on tonight's opponent, the Colorado Avalanche, and how the playoff push is shaping up through the East and the West. You can find both Locked On NHL and Locked On Avs on YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms, just like Locked On Wild. So make sure to follow along on YouTube, subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms, follow us on social media, and you won't miss out on anything we have for you throughout the week. Pre- and post-game content, plus new episodes every Monday through Friday, all parts of the Locked On Podcast Network.